Our next speaker is the founder and CEO, Migo, who will be discussing the topic, lending at scale through AI. He leads a team of data scientists and is passionate about the subject of AI and its applications. He holds a PhD in computer engineering from Purdue University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ekechi Nwokah.
So what I'm going to cover today is a practical application of artificial intelligence. I talk to lots of people in Nigeria about what we do. And you will hear lots of companies talk about AI, artificial intelligence, or as some people say in Nigeria, algorithm. You have algorithm, no problem. But what can you actually use these algorithms for in business to progress a goal or an outcome or an agenda? And so what our company does is help institutions achieve this in the realm of credit and lending. What I'm first going to talk about is walking through a traditional loan process in a bank. And this could be a bank anywhere, not just in Nigeria. This is a very typical bank in anywhere in the world, and you want to get a loan. Now what happens? Well, the first thing, or let's take at least a Nigerian example. You call your account officer. Everyone has an account officer. That's always harassing them to come and deposit more money. So you first inquire about the loan. Say, I want a loan. And you tell the account officer what you want the loan for. And they says, okay, why don't you come in to the bank and we can connect you with a loan officer. So you come into the bank and you speak long grammar about you want the money, you got to use it for this, that, you're going to invest it, you're going to do all kinds of wonderful things with it, and the bank must give you this money. So the process of inquiry to kind of coming to the loan officer, then they ask you for, it takes maybe, let's say a day, you come in the next day, and then they ask you for a bunch of documents. It could be your pension, your salary, collateral that you might want to put down that the bank might ask for. And they ask you for a bunch of documents. Okay, fine. So maybe it takes you 2 to 3 days to gather the documents, submit them, and you submit them to the loan officer. The loan officer says, fantastic, I'll call you back. Then that set of documents goes through an internal process in the operations department, typically, of the bank. And they will do validation of those documents. So, do you really work at the place you say you work? Is your salary really what you say your salary is? Is your pension, is all that valid? And that takes, let's say, another 2 to 3 days, if you're lucky, okay? Then the next step is to actually underwrite and price the loan. So how much is the bank willing to give you and under what terms? Now, this process typically goes to what internally in the bank is known as a credit committee. And the credit committee might not look at every single decision, but typically the CRO or the chief risk officer in the bank, along with the credit committee, will then decide, okay, we're going to extend this line of credit or this loan to this person. And that involves a group of people, right? And that process can take, depending on when the credit committee meets, can take, let's say, another week. Let's say credit committee meets every week. So it takes another week to get approval from the credit committee. And then once the credit committee approves the terms of the loan and you agree, and sometimes there's a negotiation back and forth that can take, a day or so, then they will then disperse the loan. And most banks will only disperse a loan into a bank account in the same bank. So if you're not banked there, you must then first open an account so that the money or the float does not leave the bank. Banks don't like float to leave the bank. And that maybe takes another day, all right? And so then your loan officer, once you have the loan, will manage the process. So are you making your loan payments on time, et cetera, et cetera. If any of them are late, you get a call, okay, please, you're owing us this month too, blah, 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 blah. And then finally you pay back the loan. And that completes the transaction. So the challenge with this, and this has been done since time immemorial for lending money. But in modern banks, just look at the number of people at the top that are involved end to end. This is just the bank staff. Then look at the bottom at the number of days it takes to process this loan. So it will take maybe 2 weeks, typically, for you to walk into an average bank and come out with a loan if they approve, and maybe 2 to 4 weeks, but let's say 2 weeks on average. So this is the way lending works today. Okay, now, but the challenge is that it's expensive because you have many staff, you have a branch of the bank that you have to maintain for the person to come in and talk to the people, okay? And it can take as much as $50 just to process that application. Well, the challenge is that it only makes economic sense for the bank to process that loan if they're going to make enough money from the loan to justify the cost. So for smaller loans, it just doesn't make economic sense. It's not that the bankers are slow or they're not interested, it just doesn't make money. So as a business person, it doesn't make sense for the bank to lend you money, a small amount of money, when it costs them more to service the loan than the money that you're looking for. So it excludes 2 billion people, actually 3 billion around the world, not including China, by the way, out of the credit space. They are unable to get credit because it's not profitable for a typical bank to give them credit using traditional lending methods. Okay, so there are 3 billion people in the world with this problem. 2 billion of them have phones. So there are 2 billion people with mobile phones in the world that don't have access to credit. And that really is the problem that we want to solve. In Nigeria, less than 5% of the population have accessed a loan from a formal institution. This includes microfinance banks, by the way. Less than 5%, right? So most average Nigerians cannot get a loan. In fact, most of us in this room would not be able to walk into a normal bank and get a loan like that, right? And I'm sure that most of us are not, your average Nigerian on the street. And so it's a real problem. And the reason it's a problem, not just because the people cannot get access to the credit, it affects the national economy. If you look at many quote-unquote developed nations in the world, they have very large middle classes that power the economy by consumer spending and ensuring that the flow of value goes through society to generate GDP. When people do not have access to credit, it's very difficult for them to climb into the middle class because most people in the middle class in these countries are built on the back of school loans and car loans and credit cards. Those don't exist in a place like Nigeria normally. And so not only does it affect the individuals, but it affects the overall health of society. So it's a big problem that we need to solve. If you look at the actual human impact that it has, and this is universal across the world, let's just take some examples. So let's say you're a farmer in Peru, and you need money for your daughter's school fees. If you can't get it, in some countries, elementary education is compulsory. Everybody has to go to school, and the state or the government is willing to subsidize or pay for that education. In many countries, that's not the case. If you don't have money, your child is not going to school that year. So it has real human impact that can affect that child's life for years to come. Let's say you're a taxi driver, and you have a flat tire. Well, you need to borrow some money to fix the flat tire so you can continue driving and making money, right? But then you need to drive and make money so you can afford to pay for the flat tire. So you're in a bit of a predicament. Again, it's affecting your livelihood, not having access to $20 to fix your tire. And then let's say you're a factory worker in Jakarta, and you could be in Lagos, you could be in many cities in the world that this applies to. Sometimes they just don't pay you that month. This happens in Nigeria, we know too well. So money no day this month. We're not paying you, sorry. We manage it. okay? And let's say you need to go to the doctor. How are you going to go to the doctor without money? So there are billions of these cases around the world that have real human impact that we want to try and solve. So I'm going to go back to this lending process to see how some companies are trying to digitize the process using more data to speed up the loan process and reduce the cost so you can extend these loans deeper into the income pyramid, meaning smaller loans to less affluent people than, say, your big corporate clients or your multi-billion or multi-million-dollar loans. So they digitize some of these processes so you don't need as many people, maybe less documentation. So if you now look at the top, see the number of people have been reduced, right? So there's an account officer maybe you apply online. There's some documentation you have to submit, maybe that takes a day because they have digital processes to handle the documents. Maybe it's only one person that needs to approve the loan instead of an entire credit committee. Maybe the risk to the institution is slightly less because it's a smaller loan. And they are able to speed up these processes. There are companies like that in Nigeria that use data processing and digitization to speed up the loan process. These would be companies, there are many of them, Ren Money, Lydia, fantastic companies that do well. And they're able to offer something different from a traditional bank. So that's kind of one approach, is really focus on data and digitization. When you extend this to mobile phones, you can do even better. The loan inquiry can be done on the phone, can take 5 minutes to download the app. There are many apps like this in Nigeria, fantastic companies, Carbon, Branch, Fair Money, etc. Okay? The application itself maybe takes 30 minutes. They ask you a bunch of questions inside the mobile app. It's very simple. You don't have to go to the bank. You don't have to submit any documentation. And then they process the application that you've submitted on the mobile app and gather some data from the phone on you. And they may look at your SMS records, or they may look at your website activity on the phone, your Facebook friends, etc. Then they gather all this data, and then they run algorithm to determine the risk of lending money to you. And then they can disperse, at least in Nigeria, almost instantly through the national switches, either NIBS or InterSwitch or whatever. So these are examples of companies in Nigeria that are starting to use AI on data from the phones to then enhance and speed up the process of lending and reduce the cost. You can take this a step further by enabling local institutions using a platform. This is what we do. So, for example, we will go to the existing traditional institutions today that already have lots of data. As was just mentioned, banks, for example, only use about 10% of their data today, even less in Nigeria. So you have these institutions that have data. So we have a platform that enables local institutions to offer credit and loans to their customers. And those local institutions are telcos, banks, merchants, payment gateways, etc. What they do is you analyze the data from the platform, from the partner. And in our case, not only do we analyze the data, but we structure it, we store it, we have all of the infrastructure around managing the loans, sending the reminders, doing the collections, doing the regulatory reporting, because a lot of our partners are heavily regulated, either by NCC or CBN or something like that. So we handle all of the regulatory issues and compliance. And then we connect to banks to then, in case the company is not a bank, we connect to a bank to fund the loan. So for example, this telco bank partnership, what we do in Nigeria with the telcos is that we have partnerships with the telcos where people can come on USSD and request a loan. And then once we approve that loan, that loan will be funded by an actual licensed financial institution. So this enables us to really get to scale, where you're dealing with companies that already have millions of customers and you're simply enabling them to offer this credit. So what does this really sort of look like in relation to AI? So for us, what we do is we end up aggregating data across many of our partners. So we can see maybe a wider purview of client behavior and make smarter decisions because we can see what customers are doing across various institutions. So we will gather data, for example, from telcos, banks, etc., and use it with artificial intelligence to make lending decisions. And it's really the lending decision we're ultimately making is how much do we think we can give this person and collect it back. Collecting it back is the most important thing. It's easy to give money. It's very hard to get it back. So we can make AI more impactful by the scale of the data that you have with a platform. So with platforms, you're able to reduce the cost even further and make it almost instant because you have access to wider data pools and a more direct relationship with the customer through the institution that you're enabling to lend. So if you look at the number of people that are all in gray up here, we've been able to eliminate them from the entire process, saving the bank in this particular customer segment the cost of having those employees run the end-to-end loan process, for example. So in our case, you can get a loan in 30 seconds. So you've gone now from a 2-week process to a 30-second process, using data to accelerate and inform your decision making. What this enables us to do, because we work with existing institutions, for example, if you built an app, you have to have a smartphone. Most Nigerians don't have smartphones. They have what they call Tokumbo phones, okay? And they use USSD, the dollar code, *111, *999. So with platforms, you're able to actually extend the reach of these services deeper into the Nigerian population. Just to give an example of the kind of scale you can drive, so since we launched in 2017, we're 2 years now from launch, we've had 7 million applicants, 1 million of which we've approved through the various institutions. We've dispersed 36 billion naira, okay? And we've granted about 3 million loans. So this is in the last couple of years. So you see the type of scale you can achieve using data and digital processes and artificial intelligence. Our ability to make that decision on how much to risk on an individual in a split second from data without 7 or 8 people being involved in the loan process is transformational. It's transformational for us, and it's transformational for the banks and the telcos, the merchants, the payment gateways that we work with. If you look at our partners, just a sample of partners that we have in Nigeria, a very small sample. Some of them are the largest of their kind in Africa. We work very closely with InterSwitch. I think most people would know InterSwitch, one of the leading payment gateways in Africa. We work with Cellulant, one of the leading mobile money platforms in Africa, certainly in Nigeria. We work with 9Mobile, one of the 4 big telcos. We work with Fidelity, a major bank in Nigeria. So we're enabling all of these people and all of these companies through data and AI to then offer credit to their customers. So we take a much more, I would say, enabling approach to the current ecosystem players rather than a disruptive approach, which both approaches are fine if you want to solve the end customer's need, but we just feel like, it is better to enable the existing ecosystem of banks and telcos and the local players to offer this service to their customers. So what we're doing now is we're expanding to similar markets. We're expanding to launching in Brazil in Q1, followed by Mexico. So we're really trying to take technology that really has been built, tested, tried in Nigeria, and then exporting it to the rest of the world, not just Africa, but the rest of the world. We think it's really important to take something that's been tried and tested in a market like Nigeria and export it to the rest of the world, because there's a great global need. But ultimately, what we want to do, are doing, along with a number of other fintech players, is solve the ultimate problem of the cost of lending using sort of traditional means. And using this new data sets, artificial intelligence, digitization, and technology, we're able to achieve scale that is simply impossible to do with traditional approaches. And on that note, that is my talk. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.